Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our new Research Award winner series titled Where Are They Now? This program was designed so that we can not only acknowledge IFFGD's 30th anniversary, but to also reconnect with some of our past Research Award winners. And today we actually have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Levinthal, who won our 2019 Research Award for Basic and Transitional Investigator Award. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Levinthal. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently and yeah, just where you are?
Sure. Well, thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to keep everyone up to date. I'm thrilled to have received the support from IFFGD. It's really a tremendous honor. I received that award in 2019, and we're now about a year and a half later. And happy to give some updates. So I do my career basically has a clinical, basic, and translational aspects to it. I'm a clinician at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. I direct our Neurogastroenterology and Motility Center. And in that capacity, I see a lot of patients that suffer from debilitating illnesses that are basically supported by IFFGD. One of the illnesses that I'm particularly interested in and that was highlighted by the award was cyclic vomiting syndrome. And this is a fairly perplexing illness, and I'm still very fascinated in that disorder, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. The support from IFFGD, there was a monetary aspect to that, and that money went directly into our research program. So I'm really happy to have received that support. It came at a critical time for us. It's directly supporting payments to research subjects. So in a very tangible way, there was a direct line between that award and supporting our work. So in a broad sense, what I'm interested in my career, I mentioned cyclic vomiting syndrome. And taking kind of a big 30,000-foot view, I have a background in neuroscience. I'm a PhD. And my passion really is to try to figure out how is it that our cognitive and emotional world is linked to changes in our body state, specifically with changes in how the GI tract works, but more globally, just how is it that our mind and our body interact? And that can be how we interpret sensations from our body and also how our mental lives impact the function of our body. In some respects, cyclic vomiting syndrome likely has a neurologic basis to it. And part of my research plan for my career really involves figuring out the neural networks that connect our brain and our body, brain and our GI tract. And I think cyclic vomiting syndrome actually is a flagship disorder that has probably a neural basis that we have yet to uncover. So I'm hopeful that with the support from IFFGD, we can come up with neural targeted therapies for a variety of gastrointestinal illnesses, including perhaps cyclic vomiting syndrome.
Yeah, we're just super glad that we could be, just a helping hand in some of the research things that you are involved in and the research studies. And I think that that's probably the most important thing about these research awards is just how can we help researchers really further the research field in gastrointestinal disorders. And I know you mentioned just a little bit about like what you're currently involved in, but can you briefly explain to us just a little bit about what you hope to gain from some of these research studies and how it can broaden our understanding for adults and children?
All right, thank you. Sure. I mean, with such a good open question, I'll spend the next 3 hours talking your ear off. No, I'm just kidding. I'll try to focus a little bit. If you get a researcher talking about their research, you got to be careful. So I think based on your question is, how do we hope to translate anything that we're doing, even on a basic science level? So one of the major projects that I've been involved in for quite a number of years with a colleague of mine named Peter Strick at the University of Pittsburgh, a giant in the field of neuroscience. My partnership with Dr. Strick has really borne a lot of fruit in detailing the nerve pathways that link the cerebral cortex, the thinking part of our brain, action output of our brain, how that is connected to different organs. And so we use a very interesting technique using viruses, this is in animals, to trace those neural connections between an organ and the brain. And what I hope to accomplish with that line of research, we recently had a paper published earlier in 2020 that detailed for the first time the nerve map of how the brain influences the stomach. Now, this was in a rat, so that's not a human, but we're also doing these studies in primates and in non-human primates and monkeys. And our hope is that by detailing the neural map of how the brain controls the stomach, that can provide some clinical, targetable area that we could direct modulation therapy, such as transcranial magnetic stimulation or some other nerve modulating therapy that could actually alter stomach function. So can you imagine somebody with gastroparesis, for example? If there, we know a lot about gastroparesis, but there could be the possibility that changing some of the nerve input to the stomach could actually help symptoms, or functional dyspepsia, or colonic inertia, or any number of gut disorders. So having the nerve map basically provides a map of potential therapeutic targets. And that's really where I hope to translate some of the neuroanatomy work into human studies to focus on that project. And that's the second arm of what we do. I have and this is exactly where the money went from IFFGD, to help recruit human subjects into our transcranial magnetic stimulation lab. Now that we've done some of the neuroanatomy in animals, we have a decent idea of where we should focus some of the specific stimulation in a human brain. And we've started to do that work, and we haven't published it yet, but we're seeing some potential impact. So this could be a real translatable therapy for people down the road.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say. This sounds like something that could really have an impact on our basic understanding of these GI conditions for sure. And especially knowing that you've taken it from non-human primates you're transitioning it into human studies. That's a phenomenal advancement in research, and kudos to you guys and your team for furthering that research. That's awesome. So out of all the research studies that you've possibly been involved in, what would you consider maybe like your most successful one, or just one that you remember the most about in general?
Sure. Well, I would have to say, and perhaps not because it's the most recent, but I know what went into this paper. The paper published in May of 2020 in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences that detailed the rat cerebral cortical map of the stomach really was a labor of love of just years of work. To really do neuroanatomy right, one has to be so sure that we have it right. And I think I'm really proud of the work. It's really unimpeachable science, I would say. I'm so sure of those results. And one of the striking findings of that study really points us forward to some major insights. And I'm just really proud to kind of put this paper out, because for the first time, it reveals a concept that parts of the brain that regulate one set of nerves to the stomach, the vagus nerve, I think most people have heard of the vagus nerve. The set of brain control sites for cerebral cortical brain control sites for the vagus nerve are completely distinct from the set of brain sites that control the sympathetic output to the stomach. So in essence, the way the brain sees the stomach is really two different networks of areas. And there's been a debate in the field for a long time about what areas of the brain control the autonomic nervous system, or the basic output from the central nervous system to regulate organs. And the idea was that there was a common set of areas or restricted site, and it's much more distributed. And this is in the rat. The data from the monkey reveals that it's even more complex. So it's a really wide network of areas that regulate an organ. And I think that just provides a lot of insight into how there's a tangible connection between how we think, how we feel, how we intend to move. Each of the areas that are engaged in those processes are linked to the stomach, even in a rat. So just thinking about moving probably does something, or moving itself. So exercise as a therapy, we all know that if you lay around for a long time, you can even get constipated. Fascinating. So there is some link between moving and the movement of the GI tract. And so this actually provides some tangible link between that. And there are a lot of other implications I don't want to belabor, but I'm really proud of that work. It was actually, for me personally, just as a career, a young investigator, that work was highlighted in Nature. So to get kind of a shout out academically, it's kind of, little thing about the paper, and that's really cool. So I think it's making an impact. It was had a lot of press, a lot of articles on that. So I think that's what I'm really proud of.
So you mentioned just a little bit like about the vagus nerve. Not before we go to the next question, I just want you to kind of address what conditions potentially could be associated with anything surrounding the vagus nerve, like difficulties, so people
Sure.
can be aware of how your research might target
Right.
those GI disorders.
Okay, no, that's a great question. I'll try to distill my answer a little bit succinctly. So, I mean, in essence, the vagus nerve, and we all say the vagus nerve, but what is that nerve? That nerve is mostly a sensory nerve. So it's really the conduit for information to come from our gut to our brain. But a major minority of the nerve, but an important component of it is the output linking control signals from the brain to the gut. So it's really it's a bi-directional, it's like a highway with two lanes. More of them leaving the gut than coming in, but it's a two-way street. So when the vagus nerve is dysregulated in any way, this can have major implications for gastroparesis, functional dyspepsia, and ultimately the programming of the motility of most of the GI tract, ultimately. So damaging that nerve has major consequences, which we've known for a long time. So a lot of patients that might be watching this that have disorders like gastroparesis, functional dyspepsia, chronic slow transit constipation, idiopathic, ileus-like illnesses, pseudo obstruction. That could be a reflection of the vagus nerve not working well. And if we can kind of almost hack into the nerve system that regulates what the vagus nerve does, then we might be able to counter that. So that's one way that it's linked. The other major interface, which is really emerging, but is the idea that what the nerves do to the gut has an implication for how the microbiome or the bacteria that live in the gut, what populations flourished or not. The vagus nerve is not just the squeezing action of the gut; it's the acid production. It's the rate at which food is cleared or not cleared. It's immune modulation. So by us, regulating from the brain through the vagus nerve to the gut, one could have an implication on what kind of microbiota live in the gut, what kind of immune functions are happening in the gut. And that kind of rounds out the idea that how is it that stress may impact gut function? It's likely through some of these nerve pathways. It may not be exclusively through that way, but it kind of highlights the idea that maybe the gut microbiota actually are responsive to our thoughts and feelings as much as it's the other way around, which is what most people talk about nowadays. So anyway, okay.
No, yeah, thank you for explaining that. Because I mean, honestly, that gives us a good sense of how your research can be applied to basic life and people who might be listening suffering from some of those conditions, when basically understanding how your research will further the understanding of those conditions. So yeah, out of your research involvement, what acknowledgements have you received since receiving the IFFGD award? Or before?
Yeah, well, I wish there was a litany of other awards. No, this was you were the most recent, so that's I mean, I have been very honored to speak and been invited to speak at other institutions. That is an honor. Maybe less tangible plaques over my left shoulder. You can see in the back of the IFFGD. Yeah, I was been offered a few named lectureships and to talk about my research, and I think that's been a really good honor. And I think just having a platform increasingly to promote my research has been great. So I'm a part of some wonderful organizations, including IFFGD, obviously, but American Neurogastroenterology Motility Society is hosting a lecture for me. to promote some of my work in a couple months. So I think there are lots of outlets. But anyway, the IFFGD award was the most recent one.
Awesome. And I mean, with the recent, your publication probably coming out here soon and just more acknowledgement towards that research that you're involved in, I am 100% sure that there will be other acknowledgments to come your way because you have some phenomenal research coming out of your lab. So we're excited to see kind of where things take off from here because for sure they will. So what specifically do you enjoy about research and why is that probably your favorite part about doing research?
Sure. So, I think I've always known I wanted to be a scientist in some way because I just think the exhilaration of learning something new and knowing that you're the first to know that thing, that never gets old. And it doesn't happen all the time. So even as a researcher, we would love every day to be a new discovery that's groundbreaking and so on. But there are those moments where, yeah, we got this. This really says something meaningfully new, and I know this now. And I think that's just pretty addictive. It's kind of the slot machine model, right? So it's intermittent payoffs of major awesomeness, and then a long time goes by without any success. Yeah. So no, but I mean I think being a scientist is always being curious and thoughtful, and really good science takes time, and so ultimately patience and perseverance. And I think some of the work that I don't want to belabor it too much, but the paper that I published, it took a long time because we didn't succeed a lot to get the technique to work, and it took a long time to get the techniques right. And now that we worked that out, it's bearing fruit. So sticking at it. So what I love about being a researcher is really it's the challenge, and it really takes some mental fortitude to make it through a lot of failure. And I think that's made me a better person, and it translates into being a clinician too. I see patients all the time, and approaching things like a scientist makes being a doctor a little bit more fun. I mean, we're not just following an algorithm and a recipe every single time. Being creative and thinking scientifically, to me, has always made the physician side of me, better. I think so. So it kind of is a synergy.
Yeah, and I think that that's been a common thing with a lot of researchers that we have spoken with, that basically it does make them a better clinician because, I mean, honestly, whenever you have patients that come to you with questions, being a researcher, that makes you really think about what are these questions that the patients have and maybe even turning that into a research opportunity. So I think that has definitely been a common interest with a lot of researchers. And just to hear you say that, it just adds more value to the research that you are doing because ultimately it is helping the patients that you see.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we focused a lot on maybe some of the basic science work that I'm doing, but I can't perhaps do everything, but our group is really trying to span basic to translational to even clinical work, and to kind of come full circle to cyclic vomiting syndrome. Our group is, I'm in charge of our kind of division of motility within University of Pittsburgh. And we have a growing group, and we see a lot of patients, and capturing some of the patient data in registries where patients participate by allowing us to use their patient data, and being opportunistic by getting kind of survey data and so on. We can actually put a lot of things together and do clinical research. And we have a growing number of cyclic vomiting syndrome patients that we see. And that's really going to form the basis in the years to come of being able to really look at groups of patients and learn something from that. So there's still even a clinical arm of what I do too. That's just a kind of a different scale and a different side of me. But so we're trying to do it all. So from rats, monkeys to humans and clinical studies. So yeah.
I mean, that's the best way to gain a deeper understanding of some of these topics. So, you're a phenomenal researcher, and obviously you have a great team behind you too, because some good things have come out, and we just can't wait to see what else you'll be involved in, because that'll be exciting in general for the field. So now that we've kind of talked about some of the things that you're involved in, some of your greatest accomplishments, and just also why you enjoy it, what do you see as being some of the gap needs in research right now? And for the future of research, what do you hope to see that comes out of some of the research out of your lab?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so first I'll just kind of preface saying, studying the GI tract and gastrointestinal illnesses are a challenge. It's an organ that's hard to study, honestly. I sometimes envy cardiology, not to make it easy by any means, but at least, an EKG, you can get that data. It means something for what the organ is doing at any one moment. We can measure blood pressure and so on. There's a lot of gettable physiologic information. The gut is hard. It's a deep organ that is still mysterious in terms of how it even works, much less helping when it's broken. So I think we have a large gap to go between the basic understanding of what the gut does and how it does it to even translate that into therapies. So one of the major gaps, I think, is really building the scientific understanding still in the beginnings. I mean, it's been 100 years of research in the GI tract, but the actual molecular mechanisms and the fundamental building blocks of how the gut does what it does, still a lot of gaps. And I could go into a litany of them. But I think to treat patients, though, I think one of the challenges also, especially for an organization like IFFGD, which has historically been such a great proponent for patients advocacy. A lot of disorders that we kind of put in motility terms, gastroparesis, constipation. I feel, and it's a little bit of my personal bias, but thinking about kind of brain-gut interactions, I want to kind of make sure the field kind of incorporates a kind of a more integrative view of what is happening, because you can't just do a transit study, for example, and know how someone feels. We need to incorporate some kind of sensation and maybe even stress or psychologic profile of people, because that matters. What is a symptom at the end of the day? It's what our brain makes sense of our internal world, and our thoughts and feelings are perceptual filters. So it makes sense to me that we need to think about someone as a total patient, not just a small bowel follow through test result or a gastric emptying scan result. So I think everyone's been a thoughtful clinician in the field, but kind of marrying the sensation and motor aspects of the gut, I think, is a challenge for the field, because historically there's been this yin and yang about, are illnesses centralized? Is it a brain? Is it gut? Well, of course it's both. I mean, that's easy, right? The answer is both. And how do we kind of move forward with treating patients with complex illnesses? And I think that's the challenge for the next era here.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like your lab is taking full effort in trying to fulfill that gap need as well, and just really bringing in that patient perspective and understanding how the patients perceive some of their symptoms, and what can we do in research to better understand how to treat those things and the symptoms and the triggers, whatever it may be for some of these patients. Exactly. So, I mean, I think that that's phenomenal. And I just think that the research that is coming out of your lab and still to come, we just can't wait to see more from you guys. And we really appreciate everything that you have done to further advance the field. Well,
thank you for having me here to kind of share some of this with all of you. And again, I want to thank IFFGD. It's been really a privilege and honor to be to receive the award and the continued support. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, and thank you everyone for tuning in to IFFGD's new Research Award winner series titled Where Are They Now?, where we have been able to catch up today with our 2019 Research Award winner, Dr. Levinthal. So thank you again, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Dr. Levinthal, for spending your time with us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much.